It's time to take a new approach to finding true fulfillment in your career, health, and state of mind through insightful conversations with those who have found their professional and personal passions while achieving balance. Whether it's entrepreneurs, athletes, or healthcare professionals, we bring you real people, real growth right here on the Boost Podcast. Now, here's your host, Elena Lipson.
Hey Boost Squad, and welcome to episode 25. Elena Lipson here, and I am pumped to introduce today's featured guest, Sally Hogshead. Sally, are you ready to join the Boost Squad?
I am ready. I am all in, Elena.
So before we dive into today's episode, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Mosaic Growth Partners. Mosaic Growth Partners provides growth strategy consulting to entrepreneurs and organizations in the healthcare and older adult baby boomer market. They can help you bring a new product or service to market, identify and engage new customers and partners, or grow your market share. They also provide coaching and training. For more information, go to mosaicgrowth.com. That's mosaicgrowth.com. Now back to today's featured guest.
So Sally skyrocketed to the top of the advertising profession in her early 20s. By age 24, she was the most award-winning advertising copywriter in the U.S. Her campaigns for brands such as Mini Cooper, Nike, Godiva, and Coca-Cola have fascinated millions of consumers. At the age of 27, she opened her first ad agency, and her work still hangs in the Smithsonian Museum of American History. Drawing upon this remarkable branding legacy, Sally developed the Fascination Advantage, which is the first algorithm to measure personal brands. And unlike traditional personality assessments such as Myers-Briggs or StrengthsFinder, Sally's test doesn't measure how you see the world, but how the world sees you. She frequently appears in national media, including NBC's Today Show and the New York Times. She was named the #1 brand guru in the world, and her practical marketing system now lives inside organizations such as IBM, Twitter, and the YMCA, as well as thousands of small businesses. The Science of Fascination is based on Sally's decade of research with dozens of Fortune 500 teams, hundreds of small businesses, and over 1,000 C-level executives. Her newest book, Fascinate: How to Make Your Brand Impossible to Resist, is a New York Times bestseller. Sally is one of only 172 living members of the Speaker Hall of Fame, which is the global speaking industry's highest award for professional excellence. So we are so lucky to have her here with us today, and I can't wait to just dive in and get started. So Sally, what are the 3 things that we should know about the Fascination Advantage?
Well, first of all, thank you, Elena, for that awesome introduction. I love it. The 3 things that we need to know about the Fascination Advantage is normally when we think about personality test, we think about how do you see the world? In other words, when you look out through your eyes, through the lens of psychology, how do you perceive other people? And that's where, it's the basis of Myers-Briggs and StrengthsFinder and DISC. But I drew upon my background in branding, and I thought, a brand like my former clients, Mini Cooper and Coca-Cola, a brand doesn't care about how the brand sees the world. The brand wants to know the opposite. How does the world see the brand? So first thing is, in a distracted and crowded and commoditized world, it's good to know how you see the world, but it's way more important to know how the world sees you. Yep. The second thing that's crucial to know about your Fascination Advantage is you don't have to fix yourself. Don't focus on your weaknesses. You don't have to change who you are. You have to become more of who you are. Once you identify who you are at your best, it becomes a lot easier to just do more of what you're already doing right. And the third thing is, don't focus on strengths. There's a lot of conversation in the business discussion over the last decade about what are your strengths. The problem is that when you focus on your strengths, it's competitive with other people. You're looking at yourself in terms of how you compare. The question today is, what are your differences? How do you differentiate yourselves? So those are my 3 points about why it's crucial to know your Fascination Advantage.
Wow. So the last point you made is so different than everything that I've heard, and even the way that I often think about don't focus on your strengths. And that makes a lot of sense because when I work with companies too, I'm always talking to them about differentiating their value proposition from what else is out there. And that's a lot different than thinking about your strengths because a lot of your competitors will have the same strengths as you, but what really makes you different? I love how you talk about looking at it from that perspective. and the idea of not focusing on your weaknesses and become more of who you are, that I totally agree with as well. So a lot of times when you're in like a corporate environment or even just any other organization where you're not setting the tone and the culture, it sometimes can be hard to be authentic because that culture might not fit with who you really are. And that's kind of one of the nice things about going off on your own is it really gives you the opportunity to be true to yourself and be authentic and be who you are instead of trying to be what you think other people want you to be. So I really like those points.
Beautifully said. Yes.
Thanks. So I want you guys all to know that you're going to have the opportunity to take the Fascination Advantage quiz. And I took it yesterday, and we'll talk about those results in a minute. But what you need to do is you need to go to howtofascinate.com/you. And we have a special access code so you can get the quiz for free. And the code is BOOST17. And, I'd love to hear feedback from people after they've taken the quiz. I found it to be really interesting. And Sally, I want to talk to you a little bit about my results. So why don't you share with us what you learned about me from the quiz?
When you took the assessment, when you took the Fascination Advantage, remember, we're measuring how other people see you at your best. Your result is that the number one way that you're most likely to impress and influence other people is through power and confidence. In other words, you're very comfortable in a leadership position, your natural authority. We notice a strong correlation between women who rise in organizations and the use of power. That's not to say that women who don't score high on power can't rise. It's relative to the average population of people who've taken the assessment. The second thing we saw about you, Elena, is that you also fascinate. Your second highest is prestige. And what that means is you're focused on excellence. You want goals, you want results, you love to be able to tackle big challenges. Now, here's what's important for you to know. So easy for you to focus on where we're going, what we're doing, what are we going to do next? For you, it's almost like 1, 2, 3. Sometimes the people around you they don't know exactly what you want. Have you ever been in a situation, Elena, in which you get frustrated where you feel like other people aren't keeping up, and that becomes
Yeah, I wish
almost
you could
like
see.
annoying, like you're not achieving the goal. Where are we going? Do you
Yeah,
ever feel that way?
I wish you could see my face. I have like a huge smile on it because that has happened to me a lot. And like everything that came out of the assessment was just like ringing so true for me. And I used to manage really large teams. And to me, it would be like, oh, this is so clear. And I've laid it out for you guys. And what's the problem? Why can't you follow along? And I know sometimes my expectations are too high and I'm moving at too fast of a pace for other people. And so I 100% hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and so it's not that you need to dumb yourself down. Can I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
Okay, your archetype, in other words, your personal brand, when you took the assessment, your archetype is the maestro. So I want you to think if somebody is in front of an orchestra who's leading them, who's the authority, guiding them on how to take action. Have you ever been in a situation in which you couldn't be in that role, where you couldn't be goal-oriented, or somebody was saying, Elena, just pipe down. It's okay. Go with the flow.
Yeah, I absolutely
What's
have.
that like for you when you're in that position?
It's so frustrating, and it's sort of hard to watch people when I perceive them to be kind of steering the ship in the wrong direction. And, usually I just kind of disengage.
And it's easy to become demoralized. And here's the
Yeah.
thing. Different people excel in different ways. Different people have different well springs. And what we see on teams is the high performers have a specialty. I've measured 1 million professionals at this point. And when we look at the high performers within organizations, we need people who are detail oriented, or who are passionate, or who are the listeners, or who are the creative ones. That's absolutely essential. But if you put somebody in a job description, slapping a job title on them in which they're not allowed to bring forth what they naturally do, the way in which they are most primed to succeed, you're setting them up for failure for 2 reasons. One is they're not able to bring forth the way in which they over-deliver. They can't deliver a specific benefit. The other thing is you're probably asking them to perform in ways that it is their quicksand. And I'll give you an example. If somebody comes to you, Elena, and they imagine you're working with a client or a team, and they say, hey, we've got a difficult challenge. We need a leader who can come in and show us the way, and we need you to be the example of where we should go. How would that feel for you?
That would feel awesome.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Like you could really sink your teeth into that, couldn't you?
Yeah. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm all in. I can do this. I'm the person.
Right, right. It would be like, man, you could get up in the morning and you would know that you could over deliver. So that's an area where you can really add value.
Mhm.
So the three adjectives that describe your archetype, the maestro, are ambitious, focused, and confident. So if I came to you and if I said, Elena, we need someone who can be ambitious about achieving the result. Could you do that?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I said, we need someone who can be focused on the goal, could you do that?
Yeah, sometimes too much so.
Yeah, yeah, of course. There's a flip side. And finally, confident. If I said, you have to come in and steer the team in a way that's confident, you can't be mamby-pamby. Could
Yeah.
you do that? Yeah, but so now let me flip it around. If I said, hey, we want you to sit and just talk to people, it's really important for you to hold their hand, just listen while they describe what they're experiencing. On the other hand, how would that feel for you?
It's hard. It gets exhausting for me to do it. And I'm so wanting to jump in and be like, oh, have you thought about doing it like this? Or here, I know how to
Yeah,
make this go faster.
yeah, exactly. So what ends up happening though is if you joined a company and let's say you are hypothetically, say you're in the HR department and your job all day is to hear people come in and describe what's wrong, but you don't really have a specific way of making decisions. Or let's say you're an office manager and you've been told by your boss your job is to hold hands, boost morale, but you don't have any decision-making power. That would probably be discouraging. Not just
Yeah.
annoying, but deeply disempowering, right?
Yeah, it'd be like my worst nightmare.
Yeah. So for you, the three adjectives are ambitious, focused, and confident. But let me describe something that for me was a big surprise when I began doing this research. There are people, many people, for whom if you said, go into this challenge and you need to be ambitious, focused, and confident, that would be exhausting for them. Instead, they want to be able to boost morale, listen to problems, and just be part of the corporate community. And so what we learned from this is just as the high performers have a specialty, the best performing teams have diversity of performance styles.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, you don't want a team filled with people just like yourself. You're not going to get people that have those differentiating, winning personality traits and features, and you're going to have groupthink where everyone has kind of the same thoughts on everything. So you always read about teams and the need to have them be diverse and complementary to each other.
Can I give you an example of that?
Sure.
My archetype, when in the Fascination Advantage, I'm the catalyst. The catalyst, my number one advantage is connecting with emotion. My number two advantage, meaning the way in which I'm second most likely to communicate in a way that is a wellspring and make a positive impression, is through innovation. So I succeed. I have a competitive advantage in situations in which I can be passionate and be innovative. But when I work with people who are also the catalyst, like me, there tends to be this, we're really passionate and we're really innovative, but there's not somebody who's necessarily leading the charge or following through. On the other hand, when we measure groups that have a bunch of maestros like you, everybody's goal-oriented, but the culture becomes brittle because everybody is so focused on the goal that nobody's thinking about how do we build morale and create a culture in which it's inclusive and engaging.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know I actually co-led a large team with someone once, and we were a great team because she was that one that boosted morale and brought the team together and just had that spirit of bringing us all together, recognizing people's unique abilities and how they could work together. And I was the one kind of driving everyone forward, keeping us on track, coming up with the plan, making sure we were focused on the goals. And it was a great combination. So that makes a whole lot of sense. One other thing I want to talk about is, so you've talked about your type and my type, but what is the most predominant type that you see through your assessment?
It depends on gender. When we look at this, the methodology is to look at industry, discipline, gender, size of company, and age. And so each of those has different things that are predominant. Let me talk for a sec about industry. Financial advisors, people involved in finance, they tend to use prestige, higher standards, and power. prestige and trust. Their archetype is named the diplomat. That's not all of them, but that's the most predominant one. In sales, the most predominant is power plus passion, which is named the ringleader. They're motivating, they're spirited, compelling. In IT and technology and software, it tends to be the veiled strength, which is mystique and power. So it's important for you to be able to see how you're drawn to certain industries because of the way you're naturally inclined to communicate and the way in which you're rewarded.
Yeah, that's really interesting. What about, so when you look at men and women, what do you find to be like the biggest difference between where they fall?
Women use 3 times more passion than men. In other words, for women, it's really important to be able to have connection in the workplace. And I had a women's studies minor from Duke, and I studied women with a tribe in Africa. And I have spent a lot of my career understanding how brands communicate with women and how consumers build relationships with brands. So I don't mean to make generalizations, but this is based on my own research and my experience. For women in the workplace, it's important for them to be able to talk things through. And a lot of times they come up with their best ideas when they're connecting with other people. So an open flow workplace in which people pop into each other's offices or put sticky notes up on the wall, talk things through. Hey, can I bounce an idea off of you? That's crucial for women succeeding in the workplace in general. Not every woman, of course. For men, on the other hand, they prioritize listening and being able to have their ideas heard. Men are far more likely to want to work solo. They want to be able to take an idea, like give me all the information, give me the Excel doc. I'm going to sort through it. I'm going to come up with an answer, and I'll come back to you when I have the answer. For women, that feels dictatorial. A lot of times for men, the process of women communicating can feel like, why are we talking about this? Let's just solve it. That creates a lot of confusion and a lot of conflict in the workplace. And so what we see is, as women rise within an organization, sometimes when they hit mid-level, they become frustrated with this concept that they need to fix themselves, that they're not doing it right. So what we found is, our research isn't just on women, although we've studied 500,000 of them. What we find is within an organization, if people feel like there's an ideal that's getting imposed on them, they become so discouraged that they will either leave, which is usually bad for the organization because there's a brain drain, or they stay and they're just disengaged. And you used the word disengaged earlier when I said, how would you feel if you had to sit around shuffling papers and not have a specific outcome? And I thought that was a great example of how, if you were in an organization that didn't allow you to be goal-oriented, that you would probably become disengaged, which would have a cost to you, but even another cost to the organization.
Yeah. Listening also to you talk about the gender differences, I'm finding myself feeling like an oddball because a lot of the things that you said about men feel more like the things of sort of like my work style and what I like. And unlike what you talked about women, I don't like sitting around in meetings talking everything out. I kind of like to do the analysis, hear things once, and then kind of go off on my own and think through it and come up with some recommendations and ideas. So it seems like I don't really fit into that bucket, but that is interesting.
Oh, and here's the cool thing. The most rare types of people, in other words, the people who don't necessarily fit into the norms, become the most precious within an organization. Because if you have a lot of people who are doing one way of communicating, it becomes, we call it a double trouble. A double trouble is when you take your advantage and you turn it into a disadvantage. I used to hire people who were like me because I felt like I clicked with them in the interview. There was chemistry there. Mm-hmm. And the problem is you got a bunch of people running around like yourself. And in my case, they were really creative and they were highly engaged, but nobody was ever sending out the invoices. So I learned really quickly, I have to hire people based on different fascination advantages. I personally hire for alert, which is all about details, mystique, which are the type of personality that listens and executes, and trust, which is about consistency.
Wow, I can see how this would be really helpful. I actually worked with a client who had me take a different kind of assessment just to learn about me, to see whether I'd be a good fit for this role. And it was, a part-time small contract. No one had ever done that. And I've never had anyone do that for like a corporate job. When I was in high school, I think I had to take one of those for a typical high school summer job. But that is a really interesting thing to think about having people take these assessments before you hire them, so you make sure you're hiring the type of person you actually need rather than the one that maybe you just click with and you kind of get caught up in the moment, and then they could come into your organization and maybe not be able to bring that different viewpoint that you really need because you hired someone that just felt right.
Yes, and additionally, it's also about when you hire somebody, how can you foster the role so you already know how they're most likely to add value. We did a big training with about 200 directors at a major technology company, and we separated them into groups. So all the passion personalities in one table and all the power personalities in another, and so on. And the power personalities, the way they naturally communicated was by squaring off almost like it was a boardroom. They took their chairs, they formed a square, and then they debated. The passion personalities were high five, cheers, good job, yeah, putting up things on the wall and drawing out their ideas. The mystique personalities wanted to listen to each other, so nobody was really talking. They passed ideas around with pieces of paper, and at the end, their idea was very elegant. So the point is, when you're working with people who are different than you, it creates more like a hybrid, a combo platter. It's more healthy. I happen to know, Elena, you have a doggie that I would affectionately say is a mutt.
Yep.
Would you agree? Yeah.
She is.
She is. So Harley, if I remember correctly, she has 3 different breeds interwoven. Is that right?
That's true. Chow, Spaniel, and Shar-Pei.
It's so cool. She has a genetic advantage. She's got, from a Darwinian perspective, she has the best of 3. And I, on the other hand, I have a French bulldog. Her name is Bacon. She looks like a pig. She sounds like a pig. She snorts. But a mutt has big genetic advantages over a purebred. And the same is true of teams. Teams that have mutt-like qualities they have the best of multiple characteristics.
That's a great point. I mean, everyone even says when you think about dogs, like the mutts end up being healthier because they don't have a lot of the genetic issues that some purebreds have. And I've never thought about translating that into a team, but it's a great analogy. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little more broadly about personal branding. And so you've been in this space for a long time. What do you see being the big trends now and in the future?
The big trend is not focusing on your handshake or your smile or your necktie or the typeface of your resume. Personal branding is a concept that I'm actually not a huge fan of that term because it sounds kind of 1990s. And the focus is on fitting in. The irony is it's about branding yourself to emulate other people who are successful. And so people have this idea when they come into an organization, got to have a big glittering smile and they need to have a resume that says, here I am. When in reality, that's simply not how everybody communicates. The other thing I see is within organizations, when people are evaluated on paper, they all sound the same. So they're a commodity. If you think of salt, generic salt is not perceived as being valuable. Morton salt is more valuable, and people will pay up to 187% more for Morton salt. And then there are these exotic new salts. I was just served a salt that was $18 per serving at a high-end restaurant. So when you think about that, think about salt, which is a commodity, and there are different ways that branding can elevate perceived value. In the same way, you can elevate your own perceived value by emphasizing the way in which you're different than other people. We talked about it a moment before. Different is better than better.
I love that. Different is better than better.
Different is better than better.
I'm going to have to use that. I basically have been saying that in a less impactful way to my clients, and I think the way you said it is great. If you guys also don't follow Sally on LinkedIn, she's always posting all these great truisms there that are just seem so obvious, but I've never heard them before. I love reading those.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure. So you've obviously built this amazing career as a top brand guru. Can you give us 3 tactics for how you've done this? And, you started doing it at such a young age, so talk a little bit about that as well.
Sure. Well, let's take a look at some of the world-class brands. What do they do? And then how can we emulate that in our own communication? The first thing is your difference doesn't have to be significant, but it must be distinctive. My difference, like we were talking before, I'm the catalyst. So my differentiators are I communicate with passion. I communicate with innovation. When I, in the past, have worked with clients, when I didn't use those differentiators, in other words, when I dumb myself down because I thought they wanted something that I was just trying to get the contract or, whoring myself out for a project that I really wasn't right for, I've always regretted it. And it was disengaging, as you described, and I also wasn't perceived at my best. So understand that your differences don't have to be huge, but they have to be distinct. The second thing is, every time you communicate, you're doing one of two things. You're either adding value or you're taking up space. When you take up space, people are less likely to listen to you, respect you, remember you. They almost tune you out like human spam. On the other hand, when you add value, people seek you out, they pay more for your opinion, you're more respected, you become the expert, the authority in your area. The last thing is, the world isn't changed by people who sort of care. If you sort of care about what you're doing, you're sort of going to fail. You're definitely going to sort of succeed, but not really succeed. And the thing is, you have to be almost irrationally passionate about what you do in order for you to be able to make a real difference in the world. Whenever I've worked on a project, even if it's within my own company, if I sort of care, it always bombs.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to kind of figure this out. If I'm not deeply involved in something emotionally, really involved and really embracing it, then it kind of dies on the vine. So find the things about which you don't sort of care, because the world isn't changed by people who sort of care.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, unfortunately, most people don't have the luxury of always working on things that they passionately care about. So do you have any advice for people that, keep finding themselves in situations where they only sort of care about what they're doing, but how they can still offer some difference that's maybe not a lot, but distinct from other people, and that they can still add value?
Yes. Here are 3 recommendations, and I'll give you an example. I sort of care about Excel documents, but I don't really care, and I really can't add value in that area. Spreadsheets are not an area in which I excel. So there are 3 things I could do. Say somebody came to me, a key client, or it's something as an entrepreneur, something comes on my shoulders that I need to deliver. First thing I could do with an Excel doc is that I could discipline myself, that I would say, okay, 1 hour a day, I have to do this. It's essential for the survival of my business. I don't like it, but I've got to turn off the phone, turn off the email, and just dig in. Second thing I could do is I could delegate it or partner with somebody. And the third thing I could do is what I call delete. I don't like expense reports. So you and I were introduced by a mutual friend, Mike Gottesman, and what Mike will back up is my company doesn't do expense reports because it's simply not how we add value. What happens is I'll go to a great event, I'll give a speech, I'll feel just this happy bubble, the audience does a standing ovation, and then suddenly the whole conversation after the speech becomes about where's the receipt for the hot dog I ate in the airport. or the slice of veggie pizza. And so I deleted that. I just simply said, our company is not going to do expense reports. We'll just have a flat travel fee. So your 3 options are discipline, delegate, or delete.
I love that. And I like how you provided that funny example at the end too. I think so often we're trying to force ourselves to do things a certain way, especially with standard processes that are just the way everyone else in the industry does it, because we think we have to. And so that's a great example of how you just kind of flipped it, and you still bill people for expenses, but it's just in a way that's a lot easier for you to manage. So I like that. Can you tell us about a time when you stagnated or stopped making progress? It seems like you have had one win after another, but no one's life usually is that easy. So
yeah,
I'd love to hear about a time when maybe you were challenged a bit.
Yes. After the launch of my last book, the name of the book is Fascinate. I worked really hard on it. I threw myself into this. It was an exhausting writing process. It was 3 years of in-depth writing and research. And it was actually the relaunch of a book that I did in 2010. This new revised version took longer than the original version took. After the book launch, I had a crash. I was just so burned out and couldn't get emotionally involved in anything. My company stagnated. If I'm not there, remember we described a moment ago, the world isn't changed by people who sort of care. And for a period of time, for about 3 months, I sort of cared, and my company sort of didn't do really well because I I needed to regenerate. And what I learned from that is I'm actually more of an introvert than I thought. And it's really exhausting for me to put all my resources into something for months. And my team was the same way. Everybody was burned out. So I've gotten better at pacing myself. And we do sprints now where sometimes the sprint is 24 hours and sometimes it's a month, but we don't put ourselves on the line every day, giving up vacation days and not seeing our families and not regenerating ourselves, because it's not only does it kill the spirit and the culture of the company, but for me personally, I can't be present with my kids and my husband when I'm doing that kind of intense emotional focus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're really talking about self-care, which leads nicely into the next thing I wanted to ask you, which is how do you take care of yourself when you're juggling this career that leads you to travel and speak all over the place, and you're creating best-selling books and you're leading a large team? So talk a little bit about how you escape or take time for yourself.
My husband and I are a blended family, and we have 8 kids together. So we have 5 kids in college. So spending time with my kids is a huge thing for me. I make time on my schedule for things that seem superficial on the surface, like, the dentist appointment or hockey practice. But for me, that's super generating. And it allows me to have a feeling of context. When I get away from my work, I can see it more clearly. And I think part of that is because my fascination advantage is, as we discussed, primary passion. So I have to find opportunities for me to connect. Last night, my son Quentin, he's 16, and he was saying, well, why don't we just order in? And I said, no, let's walk to dinner, because I like to sit across the table from somebody and really have a conversation where I can ask him those questions that a mom can't always ask a 16-year-old kid. How's it going in school? Who did you hang out with this week? We do a game high-low. What was your high point? What was your low point? And then we kind of talk about it. And I feel like I can't do that if we're sitting in parallel position watching TV.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're really talking about being present when you make the point to spend time with your family and the people that, energize you and that bring out that passion in you. And so I think that's really important. A lot of times people will make time for their friends and family, but they're like on their phone, and then they're not really taking that time away and making those real connections with the people that they care about.
Yes.
So you have given us so much to think about today. I feel like I could talk to you forever. There's so much more I want to ask, but we are running out of time. So let's go ahead and close with a parting piece of guidance for us.
I want to leave people with this idea that something I see in my kids is the older they get, the more they tone themselves down when they're in their teenage years. And the reality is you don't learn how to be fascinating. You don't have to learn how to fascinate people. You have to unlearn boring. So what I recommend for people is think over the course of the next couple of days, in what ways have you learned boring? In what ways have you learned how to stand in the back of the room, to be quiet, to shut yourself down, to dumb down the parts of yourself that are most compelling? And how can you unlearn that? And for me, I've realized it's really hard for me to publish blog posts. Sometimes when I get when I get a bunch of negative comments, it makes me feel like, oh, I'm stupid for having written that, or I have the wrong opinion. But when I don't put myself out there, the content doesn't make a difference in the world. So I had to unlearn boring and say, I need to continue to publish content, even if it's hard for me. It's not about me. It's about material and message making a difference.
Yeah, I love that. So unlearn boring and don't tone yourself down. I hope today's episode inspires you to think more about how you can find your passion and live your best life. For more information, including links to resources that Sally and I chatted about today and how best to get in touch with her, head on over to our website, theboostpodcast.com, and check out our show notes from this episode and catch the Boost bonus. Sally, I want to thank you for sharing your journey with us today. And remember, anything is possible for you.
Now that you've completed this episode, the next step is to join the Boost Squad for strategic insights, tips, and tricks, as well as exclusive resources designed specifically to accelerate your personal and professional growth. All this and more is waiting for you at theboostpodcast.com.